Es menos bonito porque soy muy tímido. Se ve mejor detrás de la cabeza.
So clearly, it can be taught.
Debíamos partir y a la ley nuestro destino.
Miren chicos, esto lo pueden hacer ustedes.
A mí me encanta que los libros empiecen justo desde la portada.
Tiene como un puntito, está como diciendo, medio gritando.
Llegué ayer por la mañana a Buenos Aires, ciudad a la que he viajado para permitir que la ficción, una vez más, se infiltre en mi biografía.
Ir a la deriva, perderse.
La pregunta es, ¿podemos vivir sin verdades?
Hola, buenas noches, bienvenidos y bienvenidas a una nueva actividad de Filo Online 2020, cerrando casi este segundo día de actividades, de ideas, de lecturas. Ahora les traemos la entrevista Mircea Cărtărescu en primera persona que realizará la periodista Lala Toutonian. En especial para esta actividad agradecemos la colaboración de Editorial Impedimenta, con quienes venimos deseando concretar esto desde hace algunos años. A continuación escucharemos a Mircea Cărtărescu, narrador y poeta rumano, considerado el escritor más importante de su país. Por suerte y gracias a Impedimenta, muchos de sus libros se consiguen en español, como su obra poética reunida, el volumen de cuentos Las Bellas Extranjeras, el libro de relatos autobiográficos El Ojo Castaño de Nuestro Amor y la novela Soleinoide, considerada su obra más madura hasta la fecha. La entrevista estará a cargo de Lala Toutonian, periodista, crítica cultural, editora y traductora y sobre todo una enorme lectora de la obra de Cărtărescu. Los dejamos con ella para que comience la conversación y además los y las invitamos a comentar esta charla con el hashtag Filba 2020 en sus redes sociales, a suscribirse a nuestro canal de YouTube para poder seguir viendo todas las actividades de esta edición del Filba. Muchas gracias.
Hola. Hello, Mircea. How are you doing? It's an honor to talk to you. On behalf of Filba and myself, I welcome you and I thank you for your time. And I would like to start maybe asking you how you're doing these particular days. How do you cope with mandatory confinement? How's your family doing? Do you live all together and things? Thank you.
We have been confined for 2 months this summer, but now it's a bit better. Although the children started to go to school and the situation becomes a bit more complicated. But anyway, I'm all right. My family is all right, and I hope that we'll be staying all right during the winter and see us in spring very okay, like everyone.
Right.
I wish everyone okay. Yeah.
And how do you feel about this? What do you do? Do you write? Do you read? Are you able to do it? Because there's people who can't do a thing about it.
I started to my very, very great surprise. I started to write poetry again. I think,
All right.
I think without this pandemic, it would have never crossed my mind to write poetry again, because I have never written a line during 30 years. So my latest book of poetry was 30 years ago. And in the meantime, I only wrote prose fiction. But now I started to write poetry like a sort of a means of healing myself. I to heal myself, to throw away my negativity, my bad feelings, my fears, my anguish, and so on. And I put everything in poems, in a book of poems which has just been published these days. So I'm in a way, I'm very happy for this confinement, because I returned to my first love, actually, to poetry.
Good. That's really, really good news. Because actually, as you said, it's about healing. It's about some kind of a therapy. Do you know what? Shakespeare, when he was confinement because of the plague, he wrote King Lear, for instance. So it must be like a good time for you. And I know that you don't consider yourself as a writer per se. You say you're someone who writes literature, but I do believe you must consider yourself as a poet, because poetry is not about, let's say, just writing poems. It's about healing. It's about, I don't know if you know this, but we Argentines are very much into psychoanalysis and that kind of things. All of us do therapy. So it's some kind of a therapy, as you said. You're talking about your feelings and your fears, your traumas, neuroses. So it's a way of healing. Is it a way of healing?
Well, the writer that I love most, that I praise most, Franz Kafka, who is my god, actually, always said that he doesn't write for publishing books. This doesn't matter, and didn't matter for him. He wrote to understand himself. He wrote to understand his situation. This is what he actually said. To understand my situation. This is absolutely crucial for me too. I never wrote for a career. I don't take myself seriously as a writer. I don't even use this word for what I do, as you said. I wrote for healing myself, for knowing myself, for understanding myself, and by myself for understanding what's going on, actually. What happens to the world, what happens to us, what happens to everything, I would love to be a scientist, for example. I would like to be a philosopher. I would love to be a theologist or a mathematician, but I can't. I had no talent in this direction. So I try to understand myself by the only means and the only way that I can, by writing literature.
Yeah, and now that you mentioned mathematics, I saw this interview where you said that math had some kind of a poetry, and it became like really difficult to me to understand it, because it's about just numbers, but to get to an end, of course, just like poetry. Maybe that's the connection, is it?
Mathematics is not for everyone, not for me.
No.
An equation, for example, but I read a lot about mathematics and about the lives of the great mathematicians like Euler and many others. They were absolutely great people, and I would say they all were poets. They all were poets. Like the great scientists, like the great saints, like the illuminated persons, like Buddha or Einstein, and everyone you can think of. In my opinion, all of them were poets, because poetry is not the art of making verses. It's the art of seeing things. In my opinion, poetry is the art of understanding the world as it is. I don't praise myself as a writer, but I praise myself as a great lover of poetry. I love poetry. I read poetry all the time. I have some gods, some saints in the world poetry, like Rainer Maria Rilke is, in my opinion, he's the greatest of them all, but also many, many others. So my first love and my first, passion in my life has ever been poetry.
So you're back to your first love.
Yes, I'm very happy to be like that, actually, because
Good.
being a poet, it's a huge privilege. It's the privilege of trying to find beauty wherever it is, and also wherever it is not, wherever the people don't see it, don't see the beauty. You can easily see the beauty of a flower, of the beauty of a woman, but few people see the beauty of a spider, for example, or the beauty of a galaxy. Beauty is everywhere, in my opinion, and every search for truth the people followed is actually a search for beauty.
Right, yeah, I was thinking actually about your work, about your dreams, right? Because it's all about that. This onirism that you write, this, I'd say, like dreamlike waters where you submerge, you don't shipwreck. This oniric world, it's got to do with this psychological fact of man. Can you explore the humanity through words? And in this, as you just said, the search of truth, I mean, an existential one. But to do so, you go to really dark places. As you said, poetry is about beauty, but it's about also suffering. And so is literature, so is your own work about people suffering. How do you cope with that?
Dreaming is a huge gift that somebody gave to humanity. If we couldn't dream, we would have taken the reality as we see it. We would never have the idea of transcendence, because to dream is to change the world. If we don't dream, we live in the same world for everyone. But dreaming show us the reality is not the only world where we can live. Actually, it shows us that reality is only one of the dreams. Is one of the dreams, nothing else. Actually, what we see in front of our eyes, actually we see in our brain, within our brain. So it's also a dream, also a construction of our mind. And in my opinion, many dreams are more interesting than reality.
Absolutely.
Yes, and I love to dream. I love to dream, even to have nightmares. I love to see things in my mind when I sleep. I think that I have this from my mother. Is a family in heritage, because my mother, who is a very simple woman, she had only 4 classes, and she came from a rural, a peasant background. Each and every morning when we woke up, my sister and I, she told us what she dreamed the previous night. And she had the most fantastic dreams that I ever heard or read in literature. So she was a great dreamer, a genius of dreaming. I'm only a quarter of her, as I wanted. And I admire her very much because of it. Even now, when she's 91, she dreams each and every night. And in the morning, if I'm with her, she tells me, "Oh, I dreamed a wonderful dream. Let me tell you." And she starts to tell the story. It's wonderful.
And have you used her dreams in your work?
This is a very good question, because of course sometimes I retold some dreams in what I write. For example, in Soleinoide, all the dreams that I retell are real, so I read them during the nighttime. But otherwise, I actually make dreams. So I don't remember and retell dreams that I really had, but I make dreams. I constructed dreams, as the surrealists did. The surrealist painters and writers and poets and so on, they didn't paint or write the real dreams that they had, but they built something similar. So Magritte, for example, or Dali, did not really dream what they painted, but they painted in the key of the dreams, in a way. And this is why they have so much magic. They have an enigma in each and every painting or poems and so on. I do this myself, and I'm very happy if I really make a page to seem a dream retold.
Absolutely. And actually, now that you named Soleinoide, I believe this contrast between the daylight and the night that the teacher lives, I mean, that's a good example of this contrast, right, between the real life, I mean, the dreams, these parallel worlds, these individual worlds, right, that all of us live, but not all of us can write the way you do, of course. And I know that, well, you know who, I mean, Cortázar was another author who went into dreams a lot, and nightmares, of course. When you talk about dreams, are we talking, we'll go back to Cortázar later, but when you talk about dreams, are you talking about nightmares as well?
First I would say that I do not make such a harsh distinction between daytime and the nighttime, between the good dreams and the nightmares. No, everything can be a nightmare or can be splendid and I don't know, a fairy tale-like dream. I don't mind. I don't care. I just want to catch the magic of and the mystery of our day-by-day existence by describing dreams. And talking about Cortázar, a writer whom I love a lot, and I read in his integrity. I think I read most of his books, and some of his short stories are well, impossible to surpass in my opinion. For example, the Axolot, which is one of my favorite short stories ever. Fantastic short stories.
Absolutely.
He is a crucial person in the Latin American literature, in my opinion, because he started everything. He brought the surrealism in the Latin America, and in Argentina, speaking of his country. And it's not only this action that is so important, but by the means of the surrealism, actually he brought the romanticism, the German romanticism in Argentina and in the whole continent. So all the people who followed him took from him this kind of magic, which they redefined and renamed, coined as magic, as magic realism, magical realism. Actually, the magical realism is an exotic form of a German romanticism, in my opinion. And this is why he puts so much accent on dreams, because the romantics invented the dreams.
Well, actually, this takes me to two different questions, but continuing with Cortázar, I'll say that many of his short stories are regarding to his dreams, and as such, I mean, as dreams, they have this alterability of time, which I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that in your work it doesn't. I mean, it's somehow different. I mean, there's a chronology of time. Although now that I'm saying this, I remember that in Anthrax, you say when you're at the police station with your wife, that times it goes slower or that time's static, right? Something like that. But can we say that's a difference between you and him? I mean, this chronology of time in dreams, the slowliness, and what do you think?
Time is very important in literature. It's not only about the time, the real time that of the story that you tell, but also the time of narrating things. Each and every writer should have this in mind, that he writes very slowly, but the reader reads very fast. So it's a difference between the time of writing and the time of reading. And this is very important for someone who is initiated in the art of the prose, because a writer should make a sort of a raccourci as the statues on the top of I don't know, the very tall buildings of the antiquity were not at the right proportions of the human body, but they were elongated because the people were seeing them from below. So to look like real people, women or men, they should have been elongated. It's the same that the prose writer does. The prose writer does not use the time in the same way as the reader, but he develops, he swells very much the novel or the short story and so on, because he knows that the reader shortens it. Each and every writer should have this in mind if he wants to create a strong effect in what he does, for example.
Absolutely, absolutely. And going back to the other answer that I said, that you open it to two of them, when you say that Cortázar had these elements of the German literature, I believe, I mean, it happens the same with yours, I mean, with your work, because although, of course, it's modern literature, these elements, like instance, I don't know, the twins, the similarity, the duplicity, or the transition of a person, the mirrors, well, the mirrors would be more Dorian Gray, I believe, but can you say that what you do is a reformation, deformation of the folklore of every place?
Well, the term folklore is a bit shallow, because many people understand by folklore some peasant tales, some traditions of each and every people, and so on. But actually, that kind of specific writing or specific way of telling stories that the very talented peasants or people from the cities without high culture can tell, they preserve elements of magic thinking. This is very important. Each and every fairy tale, for example, each and every ballad sang by all sorts of people who went from village to village and made a living by singing ballads, or even the naive painting of some peasants, and the city legends of different kind of people who live in towns and retell stories, all of them are preserving old myths, an old mythology. Very, very, sometimes extremely interesting kinds of stories. When Mario Vargas Llosa wrote that novel about someone who travels to tribe, from tribe to tribe in the Amazon, if I'm not wrong. Yes, and try to connect these tribes by telling stories which define their mythology. He thought of this kind of legends and this kind of very old, ancient wisdom that they present. I used the popular peasants' stories sometimes in my novels because I'm fascinated with fairy tales. The Romanian fairy tales, like many other people's fairy tales, are fascinating, are really absolutely incredible as actually fountains that go very deep in our philosophy, in our ur-philosophy, I would say. And I tried in some places, mainly in blinding, in Orbitor, I tried to capture kind of wisdom.
Absolutely.
Yes. And I'm very proud of what I did because it's, in a way, I think it's also my duty as a Romanian to bring something from the unwritten wisdom of my peers to bring it in the world literature, let's say.
That's absolutely fascinating what you're telling, because I'm thinking about the whole Eastern Europe, actually. I mean, it has this, I don't know if mythology is the word, but yes, an ancient identity, right? This tribal thing that you, through literature, you brought it back to us, the world, through Orbital, through blinding. I mean, and it's this butterfly thing, right? Which with both wings tries to embrace the whole story of yours. So it's a beautiful thing. And about this, there's people who say, critics, right? Who say that Soleinoide is the work of Mircea Cărtărescu. There's people who say, no, blinding is the work. What do you think? Which is your work?
Well, first I continue our talk about the popular literature, the so-called folklore, by saying that actually each and every nation has its own, stylized tradition, and I would say the ways of thinking that define ways of writing, ways of singing, and so on. I remember how amazed I was when I read Ezequiel Martinez Estrada, the radiography of the Pampa, about Argentina and about the myths, the mythology of the Argentinian people, which I found. Yes, which I found after that in Borges, of course, mainly in his first books about fighting with the knives and about the tango and so on. So even the Argentinians base their lives and their thinking on very old patterns, on very old myths that define them, and you can find them everywhere in Bioy Casares, in Silvina Ocampo, in Sabato, and mostly everywhere. It's a sort of waters, subterranean waters that that nourish everyone.
That's a beautiful thing, because actually you got to think that Argentina is like a new country somehow, because we're all sons of immigrants, right? Everyone's from Spain, from Italy, from Poland, I mean, from Russia, everywhere. And actually Borges did, well, and all of them that you just named, did a great job, actually. And I found, talking about Borges, some element maybe in your work with the girl who had to learn to dream, that story. I mean, I found it that really, I mean, I believe Borges could have written that. I mean, is he an influence to you? I mean, well, I can notice you read him, but...
He's not a direct influence on my...
Right.
But coming of age, in the last 10 years, for example, I started to reread Borges very attentively, and even to make a sort of a small pastiches, well, original pastiches, I would say, paradoxically, from his stories, trying to make something from his method. This fascinating method of very dry prose, extremely dry prose, coming from a huge culture, of course, coming from everything he knew about everything. Actually, he had his library was in his head, and I tried to imitate a bit his manner, combining it with a little Kafka and with a little Virginia Woolf, for example, and just being curious to see what happens after that. And I wrote some fiction in his manner, and I'm very proud of it. And I recognize myself and I accept myself his influence upon me. But he has not been one of the most important influences. For example, your Ernesto Sabato is much more influential on everything. Yes, I have a huge appreciation of him. I think he can be defined in a way like a sort of a Dante Alighieri of the 20th century, in his very powerful trilogy, and mostly in his report about the blind people.
Wow.
Yes, I think it's one of the most amazing pieces of literature that I have ever read.
Ah, well, that's marvelous. Actually, I had no idea about that. I was thinking with Orbitor or Soleinoide, as I said before, you wrote about yourself. I mean, because there's something that I won't say a writer, let's say an author or someone who writes, they try to read about themselves. And you talk about your mother a lot. You just did, actually. And that's such a beautiful thing to do. Does she read your books, for instance? Does she like what you write? Is she interested?
I don't like that my beloved ones read my books. I don't like it. I never recommend it. My father, my mother, my children, and so on, to read my books. I don't want it. I want to keep a human relationship, not a relationship from an author to his readers. I know that most of the writers love to read from their writings to their family. Even Kafka did it, and many others. But I hate it. I never read from my writings because I think it's something a bit intimate. I think it's a bit. It would be painful for me to read from my writings to my mother or to my father. I don't want it. But I'm happy that they love me, not for what I do, but for myself. I'm very happy.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. But your wife, she's a writer as well, and she's a poet. Am I right?
Yes, this is different with my wife. My wife is also a very good novelist and a very good poet, and we read each other, but only when we finish it, not before. In the time when we write or we elaborate our works, we never tell anything to anybody. But after that, I say, Ioana, would you please read what I did? And she reads and tells me very sincerely, without flattering me or I don't know, very sincerely what she liked and what she doesn't like. And I do the same for all her books.
That's wonderful.
Yes, it's very convenient for me, and I suppose for her too, because we trust each other. We trust each other very much. I trust her taste. I trust her knowledge in literature. And if she says, well, this character is not very okay, I try to make it different.
Improve it.
Yes, I try to improve it. Yeah.
This is a personal question I have because it's about, I'm really curious, of course. This thing that happened in Anthrax, is it a true story? I mean, someone sent you a letter because your wife is in it as well. Is it true what happened?
Everything
oh my God!
Everything in this volume, The Beautiful Strangers, is absolutely true. Actually, I didn't I didn't change very many things. I tried to keep the grotesque and the funny things that I really lived in my life. So everything from Anthrax to I don't know. The other story is the one with the hunger and other ones. Everything is true. This was the paradigm of that book.
Because there's a very satirical point of view in all of them, actually, in all the stories.
Well, actually, I write books that are important for me and books that are not important for me. After I write a big and very heavy book, I try to take a rest writing easier books, like humoristic books, like books for children, like books of any other kinds. I'm also a university professor. I write academic books. I write a diary, journal all the time, and I publish it, and so on. I write many kinds of books, but only some of them are important for me, really.
But when you say funny with these beautiful strangers, these tales in this book, when you say funny, I think funny, haha, and funny, weird, both funny. I mean, in this English language that we're talking, because they're really laughing. I mean, I laughed out loud with the napkin, for instance, just by myself, sitting by myself in an armchair, and when I realized that was sperm, I won't say much, but I couldn't stop laughing. But then I thought, I mean, this is really weird. I mean, someone who did this but we know that was he from, what was it, Norway or somewhere? These Scandinavian people can be really weird as well.
Yes, if you love reading my book, I'm very pleased because it's only meaning for me to make the people feel good and laugh and have a good time in a way. I don't.
Well, you did it.
I don't put much accent on that book of mine, but I like it. I like it very much.
I really enjoyed it. Is it the Russian roulette tale? Is it in that book? Am I right?
The Russian roulette. It's the main subject of one of my short stories called The Roulette Player.
The roulette player, yes, because I have it like just by itself. Plus, it's in the book as well. But that one is not funny at all. I mean, it left me breathless.
Well, it's a part of my first book of stories, which is called Nostalgia. And
Nostalgia, right? Yeah, sorry, yeah.
And actually, it's the first book, the first short story that I ever wrote. The first proud. I was 24. I was 24 when I wrote this.
Wow, you were really young.
And I wrote the whole collection of short stories, the 5 short stories, till I was 26. So it's my first book, and in a way, when you are very young, you want to impress the people. You want to have a very strong debut, but you also make mistakes. I like this book very much, even now, and it continues to be my most translated book, and maybe and I like it because it's my first gift given to the readers. And one of the short stories, well, it's a very long short story actually.
Yeah, they're novels actually. Yeah, the twins. That's someone. Oof. And REM. This REM is the one I said before with the girl who had to learn to dream. That's a beautiful story.
REM is one of the most the best constructed stories that I wrote, and I'm proud of it because I was so young, but I had some good intuitions. Sometimes I say, well, you promise a lot, but I don't know if you fulfill the things. Yeah.
It's a beautiful book, actually. I mean, what is it like? Yeah, 5 of them, 5 stars. Yeah, but the roulette it left me breathless, as I said. I mean, that's a terrible story. I mean, that's something like we Argentines, it's like a myth. It's something like crazy Eastern Europe people does. I mean, I don't know. I mean, something like really, really weird. There's something I need to ask you first before we continue. Is it true that you write by hand?
I have always written literature by hand. At first I wrote poetry, a lot of poetry, in the first decade of my writing. I published 7 books of poetry, and the people even now in Romania praise me as a poet and less as a novelist, for example. And I wrote poetry by typewriter. I had a typewriter. Right. Yes, and
you name it somewhere. There's one of the tales where you name it, or maybe it was one of the poems.
Yes, it was America. It was from the DDR, and when my father brought it to me when I was 20, I was absolutely happy. It was one of the happiest days of my life because the idea of a writer in my mind was connected with a typewriter. So I could not see myself as a serious writer if I could not type on those typewriters, very old typewriters that are now obsolete, absolutely obsolete. And I wrote my poetry on the typewriter, and then I started to write prose, and I wrote all my prose by hand in notebooks. Without the fact that I write by hand is not interesting in my opinion, but interesting is the fact that I never tear a page from what I wrote. I never made correction. So the pages are without any correction. So when I give the manuscript to my publisher, the publisher knows that there are no corrections to be done because everything is good from my point of view. So the pages are absolutely clear without no corrections, no words wiped out, or I don't know. From the first page to the last page. So, for example, Orbitor is 1,400 pages long. I wrote it in 4 years, and there is no page taken from it, no or very few words corrected. I can produce and show the notebooks to everyone who doesn't believe me, because sometimes I don't believe myself.
Because you don't write that much, am I right? I mean, you can write maybe 1 or 2 pages per day. Is that so?
Yes, I write a very small text every day, 1 page, maximum 2 pages.
All right.
But I'm very constant, and I write every day, and step by step, little by little, like the art of knitting. Our grandmother makes pullovers or scarves by knitting, and in a way, the way that I write prose is a bit similar to knitting, because when I write, actually, I'm completely inside what I do. But after that, when I get out from my office and stop writing each day, I really forget that I'm a writer. I don't remember anything. I don't care, and I'm leading a very usual and normal life. So it's like having a multiple personality. I am one person when I write and completely other person when I'm not writing.
That's a lovely analogy with the knitting. I mean, the writing and the knitting. Let's talk, please, about these 2 things. I believe they're really important in your work, which are, you seem to be like a really spiritual guy, and on the other hand, there's this political fact. Can we say that you're, maybe it's a big word, but that you're a survivor of the Soviet regime? The whole world knows what Ceausescu did, and can you tell us about this? I don't know if it's called in English the blue jeans generations. What was it? Like an underground anti-establishment movement or something like that? I mean, was it during, I don't know, the 60s, the 70s, maybe? I don't
know. I'm now 64. I'm 64 now. I lived in a dictatorship for 34 years, and only 30 years in freedom. So I lived more than half of my life in a dictatorship, and I know what it is. I know what it is, and I will never forget them and forgive them, because they actually stole my youth. They stole my youth, they stole my childhood, and this is absolutely impossible to forgive. I wrote literature in the dictatorship without having the I don't know, any thoughts to publish it, or most of the time we were living underground. Me and my generation, we were living underground. We were reading our poems to each other. We didn't have a wish to become well-known writers and so on. And everything that we wrote was subversive, was against the regime. And this gave us the instinct of freedom, instinct of liberty. We preserved still our basic my generation, the generation of the 80s, as it is called, or you said the generation in blue jeans, even today, when we are over 60, we are a sort of a symbol of freedom of mind for the younger generation. And I think it's a very flattering thing.
Of course, it's a contra-cultural actually thing to do. Yeah, of course, you've got to survive these subversive regimes. That the only way you can do it, just writing. I believe it's wonderful. And am I right? Are you this spiritual as we can tell by your readings? It's something that's for sure that you know a lot about the Bible. That's something for sure. I mean, you must read or read. You have read the Bible really thoroughly because you know a lot of things about that. You're an Orthodox, right? You must be baptized as an Orthodox. Am I right?
Yes.
Of course.
We were baptized in this religion, but actually we lived without a religion because our parents were afraid to show their faith because it was against regime's politics. The regime only tolerated the religion, but didn't allow to be. So I lived without religion, and only when I was 30, I started to read the Bible. Actually, I had no idea about the Bible. I thought it was a book of prayers or something. And to my astonishment, I found there the greatest novel ever written. I think the Bible is a huge book of literature, a huge book of knowledge, a huge book of sapience, of wisdom, and I think even people who don't believe, even the atheists, the agnostics, would understand a lot from the Bible. A lot, because the Bible is not about faith, it's about beauty. It's about
wisdom, as you said, yeah.
It's about the world, the whole world. It's one of the greatest books of humanity. And I'm proud. I'm very happy that I discovered it myself, and I could read it using only my own mind, without any dogma, without somebody to tell me what to understand from it. So I read it like a great book and nothing else.
Talking about these Romanian traditions, I read something really interesting about yourself, which is something that happened, I believe you were like 3 years old or so, that you did with the tray. I mean, not you Romanian people. And your family thought you were going to be a carpenter. Will you tell us this story, please, about the tray that presented that's a marvelous story.
Oh, it's very nice. Of course, I don't remember anything. I was a small child, but my mother told it to me. It's a nice parable, actually. It's a habit in my country, maybe in other countries too, that at a certain age, when you are 3, for example, the priest comes and you have a ceremony. And the priest takes a lock from your hair and cuts it with scissors. And
okay.
Yes, and during this ceremony, your godfather comes with a few objects on a plate, and let you choose from these objects, and it's a kind of guessing what you'll become in life, what you will love, what you will hate or avoid, and so on. So you could choose a glass of wine, and it would be a premonition that you will become a drunkard. You could choose yes, a puppet, so it's a premonition that you will be a womanizer. Or you could choose, I don't know what tool, and you'll become a worker. But my godfather, being a coffin maker, he made coffins. Always had his carpenter's pencil here after his ear. He kept that pencil there, and
right, yeah. When they do
yes,
this, yeah.
yes, to have it at hand all the time. So he was keeping it like that all the time. I think he was born with it at the
Because he was measuring coffins, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. He had to take measures all the time. And when he presented me with those objects, he actually bent, and the pen, the pencil, fell on the plate.
Right.
And when I saw the pencil, I just grasped it from the first second and didn't want to take anything else. This is because my mother was always making drawings for me. He used to draw people or a horse or a cow. He drew for me all the time. So I was accustomed with the pencil, and I liked it very much. But from the fact that I took the pencil, I made a parable which showed that in a way the destiny chose my profession of a writer, in a way, because I chose the pencil. It's a nice way. This is because I had to write a thanking discourse for a prize, for the prize, the Formentor Prize, and I thought that having this kind of a nice story, the people will not forget it. The people will like it and remember it. This is why I remembered myself this little story from my childhood.
Yeah, I believe it's an extraordinary story, actually, because it has to do a lot with what's going to be with your life. And actually, you chose the pencil and you wrote by hand, and you're right, well, novelist, a poet, and no, it's a wonderful story. And talking about, I believe that someone who writes, it does it because of his own or her own obsessions. I believe that obsessions have a lot to do in literature, because without them, there's no way. I mean, we need dreams, as in your case, we need a lot of parallel words, but about obsessions, for me at least, I believe is the most important things. And I believe, in my opinion at least, having read your own work, that Lulu, or what I believe it's transvestite in Romanian, or the way you pronounce it, is about an obsession. It's all about that. It's all about dream. There's a beautiful dream, long dream, beautiful dream. But for me, and actually, I'm not sure I am going to say this, but I believe it's my favorite one, because there's a big obsession at the end. Well, we won't spoil it, of course, but so is it, do you agree? What do you reckon? I mean, about obsessions and writings, and tell me something about Lulu, because I love Lulu.
First, I want to thank you for it, because it very seldom happens to me that somebody comes to me and say, well, I liked Travesti or Lulu, as you said. Lulu is the most neglected book that I wrote. Very few people like it. I like it very much because, as you said, it's about something very deep in myself. It's about the myth of the androgyne, which is a central myth in the European tradition, mostly in Romanticism and in Surrealism. So the the problem there is the nature of the adolescent. An adolescent is not a man nor a woman. It's something in between. It's something not defined yet. It's something extremely interesting because it's psychoanalytic. It's in everything in the consciousness. It's a very it's a truism. The fact that actually our sex is in the brain. Everything in travesty takes place in the brain of an adolescent, where there's no masculinity, no femininity, but androgyny. From this topic, I invented a case study, actually sort of a psychoanalytical case study, a regression in the childhood when a child was born with both of the sexes, and at the age of 4, the parents had to decide, and they decided to raise a boy, but the girl oppressing himself has also a voice that must be made to speak out loud. And travesty is the hidden girl that speaks in the boy, the oppressed girl, the oppressed sister, who became a victim. He was a victim, and this is why I like so much this short novel, this very little novel, because in a way it's my most it's a novel where I try to go to the bottom of my soul. It's about myself in the deepest pit of my soul, because we talked about folklore. In each fairy tale, there's a castle, and you are told you can enter all the rooms except one. You cannot enter one room, and that one is the deepest in yourself. In travesty, I have the courage to enter in the deepest room of myself, and I think this gave me also the courage to start to write Orbitor. Without travesty, I wouldn't have the courage to write Orbitor, and after that, Soleinoide and Melancholia and so on.
Yeah, I really liked it. I mean, it's for me. Now that you're saying this about androgyny, and I don't know if you read it, but it's one of my favorite novels as well. Jeffrey Eugenides, Middlesex. I love Middlesex. It's my favorite of his. I don't like his tales that much, but because the Virtue Suicide, I mean, it's a lovely book as well. But Middlesex, it's a beautiful, very well written book. Although yours is more about romanticism, so that's some other topic that you add that it makes it such a beautiful story. I would like to ask you about translations, because it's always some very difficult topic to talk about, to do so, because I believe I translate a lot as long as I can do it. You have to be a poet to translate. And we in Argentina and the whole Latin America, we read a lot of Spanish translations, and sometimes it's kind of unbearable, I've got to be honest. And you have this Spanish translator,
Mariano Ochoa.
Maria Ochoa, thank you. And of course, you don't speak any Spanish, I believe, but believe me, what she does, it's marvelous. I mean, she's a great translator, because I don't know if she's a writer as well or if she's a poet, but I mean, you got to be really glad about this work done, because as I said, there are things that are unbearable to read sometimes, and I believe she captures the essence of what you write. Do you talk to her? How do you deal with these kind of things when you're not able to understand it?
I consider myself a lucky guy because I'm very proud to say that I have the greatest translators from Romanian to other languages possible. All of them are, in my opinion, geniuses. My translator in German, my translator into French, my translator in all the other languages, and Mariano Ochoa de Ribe is one of the best. One of the best. I have a great admiration for the translators because I translate myself, and I know how hard it is, and what a responsibility you take. It's like writing yourself. Actually, you recreate when translating. You recreate the work in another environment, in the environment of the culture and of the language in which you translate. I'm also very lucky to have a great publisher in the Spanish world.
Yeah, I know.
From Impedimenta, who is a very active and very intelligent and very educated person.
Really can't. Yeah. He's a great editor. Yeah.
He doesn't publish. He refuses to publish any book that he didn't enjoy himself. So he publishes only what he likes and only what he loves, and this is why he's such a great publisher. So I'm also lucky because of that, and I think the notoriety of some of my books in the Spanish-speaking world is owed to my translator and to my publisher. I have a big thank you for each of them.
No, they're doing a great job. Now I remember Borges used to say that you have to learn as much as languages as possible so you can read them in their original. I mean, I'm afraid I can't read any German, for instance, and I love German philosophy and literature as well, but I'm not able to do it. I can read some French or some Italian, but
if you allow me, there are also sad situations when some books actually cannot be really translated. And I have only one of this kind, which is called Levante, the Levant.
Right, yeah.
Yes, which actually could not be translated but partially, as Joa did, and it has been translated in Swedish, in Spanish, in French, in Italian, but it's not the same book. It's not the same book because this book is a poem. It's written in verses and in the 18th century Romanian. So even the Romanians have great difficulties to read it, and great pleasure, I suppose. But for being able to translate this book in other languages, I rewrote it. I rewrote it in prose. I transformed it in a novel. And this second-hand Il Levante has been translated. So it was a process, a very complicated process of translating it in Romanian and then in other languages. I think Mariano Ochoa surpassed herself when translated it.
Absolutely. She did a great work. Honestly, Mircea, I can speak for hours. I know it's really late in Romania, so this is it. I want to thank you again for your time. Thank you very much for your kind words, for all of your work, for teaching us all of this.
And I want to thank all the people who are listening to us right now. And I want to show my gratefulness for everyone in Argentina who bought a book of mine and read it and enjoyed it. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Believe me, there are many, many fans down here. So thank you very much. Muchísimas gracias, as we say. And I learned to say, mulțumesc, la revedere.
Oh, you are great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Lala.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll be in touch. Thank you.